All right, let's jump right in. Today we're unpacking Titus Maccius Plautus's Curculio. Clocking in at just 729 lines, it's actually his shortest surviving play. But, hey, do not let that short length fool you. This text is a highly concentrated masterclass in metatheatrical mechanics and sociolegal commentary. Within this beautifully condensed architectural framework, Plautus engineers a really sophisticated critique of transactional ethics, and he uses rigid comedic archetypes to completely dissect the societal values of the Roman Republic. So in this explainer, we're going to rigorously analyze the primary textual mechanisms that drive this brilliant piece of ancient secular comedy.
To unpack this ancient text, our explainer will hit 6 key areas today. First, the introduction and thematic thesis. Then, the historical and cultural context. Third, literary composition and style. Fourth, the ethical and philosophical framework. Fifth, dialectical progression. And finally, transmission and enduring legacy. Let's get started.
Part 1. Introduction and thematic thesis. The concentrated polyada.
So the whole drama is structurally anchored in Epidurus, tightly triangulated right around the temple of Asclepius and the adjacent house of the Lenonepidone, the pimp Cappadox. This intense topographical concentration directly mirrors the dense, rapid-fire textual machinery of the play itself. And the primary Latin text? Well, it isolates this ideological conflict right out of the gate. In Act 1, we meet the young adolescens Phaedramitius, who is driven by genuine reciprocal affection to liberate Plenizium. His opening lines, where he's asserting the absolute commands of Venus and Cupid, are instantly undercut by the incredibly pragmatic skepticism of his household servant Palinurus. Palinurus bluntly tells him that his clandestine love affair is literally just damage and financial ruin. This exchange perfectly establishes the baseline dialectic of the entire text. We're looking at a fundamental clash between human autonomy and raw financial transactionalism. Moving on to Part 2, historical and cultural context, the metatheatrical rupture. You know, Plautus notoriously uses a Greek setting as a sort of protective mask. It gives him a safe, fictional distance to launch some really potent critiques of Roman society. But here in Curculio, that veneer is violently and deliberately shattered. In Act 4, the choreagus, basically the stage manager and costume provider, steps completely out of the narrative. It's an incredibly jarring moment. He explicitly superimposes a satirical map of Roman vice directly onto the physical topography of the Roman forum itself. He literally turns to the audience and directs them to find periorum, or perjurers, in the comedium, mendacem et gloria sosum, near the shrine of Cloacina, and dites damnosos maritos, or ruined husbands, right behind the basilica. For a moment, the text completely collapses the Epidaurian stage world, forcing the Roman audience to confront their very own geopolitical and moral reality, before dropping them right back into the safety of the comedy. It's a brilliant theatrical rupture.
Part 3. Literary composition and style, mechanics and archetypes. Now, the whole machinery of plot and comedic pacing relies entirely on the strategic deployment of rigid character archetypes. These figures aren't meant to represent nuanced psychological realism, right? They are highly specific narrative devices designed to propel the plot at breakneck speed. The overarching genre operating here is the palladia, literally a play in Greek dress. It uses Greek settings while heavily infusing Roman cultural subtext. So why does this matter to us? Because this specific structural framework establishes a universe where subverting authority is temporarily allowed. It provides the exact architecture necessary for lower-class characters, like parasites and slaves, to intellectually completely dominate wealthy bankers and heavily armed soldiers.
And sitting right at the center of this framework, we have Palinurus. He serves as the definitive servus calidus. He's the clever slave acting as the intellectual engine of the plot, serving as the ultimate cynical counterweight to Phaedramis's poetic idealism. At one point in the text, Phaedramis literally pours wine on the doorway in this totally absurd attempt to bribe the old doorkeeper. It's Palinurus who steps in with brutal, pragmatic realism, diagnosing the lover's disease, and highlighting to the audience just how utterly ridiculous this physical action on stage really is.
Part 4. Ethical and philosophical framework, the moral economy of the stage. So what does this all mean for the text's internal moral economy? Well, Plautus maps virtues, vices, and unchecked financial greed directly onto the antagonistic figures of the play, creating a stark contrast between characters seeking genuine human connection and those driven purely by capital preservation. We see this ethical void perfectly encapsulated here, in the transactional dialogue between the ailing pimp Cappadox, the braggart soldier, and the banker Lyco. The quote we're looking at details the cold contractual transfer of a human life. 30 mina for a virgin, clothing, and gold. Quia de illo emi virginum tregintaminas, vestem aurum argentum dis lenoni, esuicdet virginem.
Cappadox, suffering from a diseased liver, is motivated solely by greed. And Lyco operates with identical ruthlessness. Their motivations are entirely transactional, rooted deeply in self-preservation at the absolute expense of human autonomy. To combat this intense transactionalism, the text deploys a major legal weapon, the lex de agnostendis liberis. This Roman legal framework functions as the supreme ethical corrective in the play. It forcefully reasserts societal values over the pimp's contractual greed, establishing that freeborn status irrevocably nullifies any commercial contracts forged by corrupt men. So ultimately, the law itself, not just the cleverness of the slaves, becomes the true hero of the story.
Part 5. Dialectical Progression. The Mechanics of Deception. Now, the main structural conflict isn't actually resolved with swords or physical force. Instead, it's a brilliant psychological ruse pulled off by the play's namesake, Curculio, the parasitus edux, or the hungry parasite. This timeline maps out the incredibly satisfying, progressive architectural flow of his deception. It's essentially an ancient heist. After returning from a failed financial mission in Caria, Curculio pivots straight into espionage and forgery. He effectively usurps the military authority of the braggart soldier by stealing his signet ring, adopts this hilarious satirical disguise as Sumanus, and successfully liquidates the soldier's funds held by the banker Lyco, liberating Plainsium in the process.
This brings us to the exact dialectical climax of the whole theft. Curculio recounts how he ruthlessly exploited a drinking session with the Miles Gloriosus, the braggart soldier. He says, Dallas arpio, ego e subduco annulum. By effortlessly slipping off that vital elephant seal signet ring while the soldier was completely in a stupor, Curculio secures the physical token of state and financial power required to dismantle the villain's legal hold over the young woman. It's a total game changer. And that missing ring? It inevitably triggers a profound structural anagnorisis, that classic dramatic recognition scene. When the soldier finally confronts Plainsium, she recognizes the ring immediately. The soldier realizes he actually gave it to her on her birthday, stating, Hic est cum ego tibi missi michali die, tam facile novi quame me, salve mea soror. This is the major turning point of the text. This exact moment establishes her freeborn status as the soldier's kidnapped sister, instantly unraveling the entire deception and activating that legal corrective we discussed earlier.
And finally, Part 6. Transmission and Enduring Legacy. Social Restoration.
When we look at the material preservation of this specific manuscript ending, it's fascinating to see how Plautus permanently codifies this restoration. You see, the conclusion of Curculio shifts dramatically from clandestine, chaotic trickery into a space of highly legitimate social order. The comedic subversion must eventually give way to societal stability. The pimp Cappadox is financially penalized for his perjury regarding the girl's status, and the narrative architecture absolutely demands a formalization of the lovers' union. We see the language of financial purchase entirely replaced by the language of lawful Roman betrothal.
Spondes ne miles mi hunc uxram? Spondeo. Do you pledge this woman as my wife? I pledge it. We witness a text that begins with illicit desires lurking in the shadows, only to conclude with strict legal justice operating in the light. So I'll leave you with this thought. Does this ancient Roman formula, where chaotic, comedic subversion must ultimately bow down to rigid legal and social order, still secretly dictate the narrative architecture of the stories we watch today?